They lived in my house, but said I was the intruder. I bought that home with sweat, tears, and every paycheck I saved over 10 years. Then they came, said it was just for a few weeks, but weeks turned into months. I lost my living room. I lost my kitchen. I lost my peace. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I just sent them one thing, an envelope with a court summons. They laughed when they refused to leave, but they weren't laughing when the sheriff escorted them out in front of the neighbors. My name is Alyssa Monroe, and this is the story of how I bought my first house and how I almost lost it to people who never paid a single dollar for it. I was 34 when I signed the papers. Phoenix, Arizona. I'd worked 2 jobs for almost a decade, one at a tax prep office by day, and another at a late-night diner off East Camelback Road. My social life, non-existent. My savings account, still limping. But finally, after years of skipping vacations, saying no to brunches, and living with roommates who played death metal at 3A, I made it. My real estate agent handed me the keys to a 2-bedroom home in Glendale, and I cried. Not because it was big. It wasn't. Not because it was new. It had a crack in the driveway and a leaky faucet. But it was mine. All mine. For the first time in my life, I had a place I didn't have to share with strangers. A place where I could breathe, where I could lock the door, pour a glass of wine, and feel safe. I didn't need a castle. I just needed peace. I spent the first week scrubbing the walls, replacing cabinet handles, laying down rugs. I bought new bed sheets, painted the bedroom pale green, and set up a small reading nook by the window. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. Then one day my cousin Michelle called. She sounded stressed. "Hey, Alyssa, listen, I have some friends. Carl and Dana, they're in a bit of a bind." She explained they had been renting a place that suddenly got sold. The new landlord was kicking them out. They had no place to go. "Just for a couple weeks," she said. "They'll be quiet, respectful. Promise." I hesitated. Something in me said, "Don't." But Michelle had vouched for them, and I didn't want to be heartless. I had a spare room. It would only be for 14 days. So I said yes. I said yes to peace being interrupted, to kindness being taken advantage of, and I didn't know it yet. But I had just invited the storm into my sanctuary. Carl and Dana arrived with 4 garbage bags of clothes, a cracked TV, and a dog they hadn't mentioned before. The first night was loud. The second night was louder. By the third, Carl had rearranged my living room furniture to fit their gaming console. "It's more ergonomic this way," he said with a smirk. I forced a smile. Told myself it's only temporary. Told myself to breathe. But weeks passed. 2 became 3, then 5. I started hinting. Then I started asking. Then I begged. And that's when everything changed. Carl looked me dead in the eye one night and said, "If you wanted us gone, you should have thought of that before letting us in. We live here now, too." I felt my blood turn to ice. This was my home, my safe place. And suddenly, I wasn't safe in it at all. I wanted to scream, but instead, I went quiet. And I started planning. It was supposed to be 2 weeks. That's what they promised. But 2 weeks became 3, and then a month, and then 6. I tried everything. I cooked dinner, hoping we could sit and talk about a move-out plan. But Carl took his plate into the guest room and shut the door. Dana said, "I don't do confrontation," and turned the TV volume up. I left polite notes. I even offered to help them find a new place, to cover first month's rent. But all I got in return was silence, or sarcasm. One night, I came home and found my bookshelf gone. Gone. Carl had dismantled it, said it didn't match their vibe. He had replaced it with a gaming chair he found on Craigslist. I stood there, shaking. And when I asked him what he did with my books, he shrugged. "Donated 'em. You didn't seem like the reading type." I should have screamed, but I didn't. Instead, I locked myself in my bedroom and cried into my pillow until my chest hurt. They started having friends over. Loud friends. Carl would invite 4 or 5 guys over every Saturday night. They'd drink, shout, play music past midnight. The floor would vibrate. And when I asked them to keep it down, Dana said, "You act like you're the landlord or something." I am the landlord. I own this house. But they spoke to me like I was the inconvenience, like I was just another roommate who needed to get over it. I called Michelle. She apologized, said she had no idea they'd turn out this way, but she also said there wasn't much she could do. "They're adults," she said. "They need to handle it." Handle it. They weren't handling anything. They were living rent-free, tossing beer cans in my yard, and using my name on Wi-Fi bills. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I tried changing the locks once. Carl called the police, and the officer who showed up, he told me what I feared most. "Ma'am, once someone's established residency, you need a court order to remove them." A court order for squatters who never signed a lease, who never paid a single bill, but who now had more legal protection than I did. I felt powerless until I remembered something. I'm not powerless. I'm a tax preparer. I know how to read legal documents. I know how to file them. I know how to fight with paper and paper. Unlike people, doesn't talk back. So I started documenting every late-night party, every passive-aggressive comment, every time they ignored my requests. I installed a security camera in the hallway. I kept a journal. I made copies of my mortgage, utility bills, title deed, all with my name, my address, my rights, I went to the county courthouse. I met with a lawyer who specialized in tenant-landlord disputes. His name was Gary Langston, and when I showed him my files, his eyebrows raised. "You've done your homework," he said. "This isn't just a case. This is a win." He helped me draft a formal eviction notice. We posted it on their door. Carl tore it up in front of me. "This means nothing," he said. "We'll see." I replied. I filed for an unlawful detainer suit. Court date 3 weeks away. I kept quiet the entire time. Didn't engage, didn't fight, just waited. But the energy in the house changed. They could feel it. Something was coming, and I was no longer the desperate, anxious homeowner they mocked. I was something else now. I was composed and quiet, and that scared them more than yelling ever could. Dana tried to be sweet again. Baked muffins. Asked if I wanted to watch TV with them, but I declined, because I had already watched enough. Watched them take advantage. Watched them cross boundaries. Watched them destroy my peace. Now it was time for them to watch as I took it all back. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I was ready. For the first time in months, I had control again. I ironed my blouse, printed every document twice, and reviewed my notes until the sun came up. When we walked into the courtroom, Carl had that same smug grin on his face. Dana looked bored, like it was a minor inconvenience before brunch. But me, I stood tall. I didn't flinch. I didn't fold. Because I knew what they didn't. Paper is power, and I had all the paper. The judge called my name. I raised my hand. My voice was calm. My evidence was airtight. Mortgage, title, utility bills, witness statements from neighbors, even audio recordings of their parties past 1A, Ma. Carl didn't have a lease, didn't have rent receipts, didn't have anything except attitude. When it was his turn to speak, he tried to twist the story. Tried to say I let them stay indefinitely, that I verbally agreed they could live there as long as they needed. But when the judge asked for proof, he had none. "So you're telling this court you assumed ownership of a home because she didn't scream at you to leave?" The judge's voice was stern, disbelief written all over her face. Dana chimed in, talking about how they'd improved the home, the gaming chair, the wall art, the extra dishes, as if adding clutter equaled tenancy. The judge took one long breath, then she looked at me. And in that moment, she said the words I'd been waiting months to hear. "This house belongs to Miss Monroe. The court grants the eviction." Carl jumped up, yelling. Dana looked like she'd swallowed her own pride, but none of it mattered, because the decision was final. They had 7 days to vacate, and if they didn't, the sheriff would remove them by force. Outside the courtroom, Carl tried one last jab. "You'll regret this," he said. I didn't reply. I didn't even blink, because I knew I wouldn't regret a thing. What I regretted was waiting so long to fight back. But now I was done waiting. That week, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate out loud. But inside, I was rebuilding, packing up their noise, their mess, their entitlement, and making room for myself again. I started reclaiming small spaces. I moved my bookshelf back into the living room, hung up my favorite painting, one they had taken down because it was too depressing. I replaced the shower curtain, changed the locks again, and repainted the front door, bright red, like armor. On the 6th day, I came home to find the house finally quiet. They were gone. No note, no apology, just silence. And for the first time in months, it was a silence that felt like peace, not defeat. I curled up in my reading chair that night, with a book they hadn't thrown out, and a cup of tea in a chipped mug they once mocked. And I let the quiet hold me. People talk about power like it's something loud, like it's shouting, or threats, or showing off. But real power, it's knowing who you are, what belongs to you, and never letting anyone take that away again. The morning after they left, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The silence was strange, not empty, just clean, like the house had finally exhaled. I walked from room to room, pausing in every corner. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner. The guest room was bare again, its door wide open. The carpets had stains. There were dents in the drywall, but for the first time in months, it was mine again. Every scratch on the floor, every nick in the paint, they were part of the story now. Part of what I survived. But just because the house was mine again, did not mean I could go back to pretending none of it happened. Because something inside me had changed too. I had learned to stay quiet. I had learned to wait. But I had also learned how to fight with precision, and how to never let chaos rent space in my life again. That week, I did what most people wouldn't find exciting. I met with my lawyer again. We documented the damages, filed for a small claims case to recoup the repair costs. I changed the locks a second time, got a Ring camera installed, upgraded the security system, not because I was scared, but because I had learned that being kind without boundaries is not generosity. It is surrender. One day, a neighbor from across the street waved at me. She had never spoken to me before. Her name was Linda. She brought over a plate of brownies and said, "We saw everything. You handled it with grace." I almost laughed. Grace is not what I felt. I felt rage. I felt exhaustion. I felt erased. But maybe grace is just that, keeping your fists unclenched while you fight with everything else. I went back to work, and the strangest part of all was how normal things seemed. Clients still complained about their taxes. My coworker still brought microwave fish for lunch. The world had not paused while I was unraveling. But I had changed. I spoke less, listened more. I smiled only when I meant it. I walked taller. Not because of pride, but because I had earned every inch of space I occupied. Michelle reached out again. She said she was sorry, that Carl and Dana had done the same thing to someone else before, that she should have warned me. I thanked her, but I didn't offer anything more. Some bridges don't need to be burned. They just need to be left behind. Late one evening, I took a glass of red wine and stepped onto the back porch. The sky was deep purple. The air was still, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just quiet and calm. That's the part no one tells you about reclaiming your life. It is not loud. It is not a grand finale with applause. It is a slow return to stillness, to yourself. I started painting again. The walls, but also on canvas. There was a piece I had abandoned when they moved in. A half-finished skyline, smudged with black and gray. I picked up a brush and added orange light in the windows. Life again. Hope. Every weekend, I made time for the things I had postponed. Long walks, fresh flowers, phone calls to people who mattered, because when your peace has been stolen, you learn to guard it like treasure. One morning, I received a letter. It was from the court. Carl and Dana had failed to appear for the damage hearing. The judge ruled in my favor. I would receive partial compensation. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to remind me that the law, at its best, can be a scalpel, not just a hammer. I used the money to replace the bedroom door, the one Carl had kicked when he was angry. It wasn't about the door. It was about restoring the part of the house that once held fear. Now, it held morning light. Sometimes, people ask why I didn't just throw them out, why I didn't scream or go viral with a video, but I didn't want noise. I wanted resolution, and I got it. Now when I walk through my front door, I take a deep breath, the kind that fills every inch of your chest, and I remember this is mine, this house, this quiet, this life I rebuilt on my own terms. A few weeks later, a realtor dropped a flyer in my mailbox. It had a glossy image of a luxury home and a headline that read, "Looking to upgrade." I stared at it for a moment and then laughed, because for the first time in my life, I did not want more. I wanted what I had, and I had enough. I took the flyer and used it to start a small fire in the backyard pit. The flames curled around the edges, burned it to ash. Some things don't belong in your space, not even as ideas. In the following months, I started sleeping with my door open. It was something I hadn't done since they moved in. It sounds small, but it was everything. Because the house didn't just belong to me on paper anymore. It belonged to me in spirit. In the way I walked barefoot through the kitchen again. In the way I sang while folding laundry. In the way I reclaimed my joy, piece by piece. I hosted a dinner for the first time, just 3 friends, some pasta, and a few candles. Nothing fancy. But as we sat around that table, laughing softly, I looked at their faces and thought, this is what home should feel like. Not tension, not entitlement, not fear of your own hallway, but presence, peace, people who ask if they should take their shoes off and actually mean it. One of my friends asked if I ever thought about selling the place, moving into something newer. I told her no, because this house taught me something no fresh paint or bigger closet ever could. It taught me how to hold the line, how to protect what is mine without losing myself in the process, how to return quietly, steadily to who I really am, and that is worth more than square footage, more than upgrades, more than anything I could buy. When I turn off the lights at night, there is no more shouting, no more slammed doors, just the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind through my curtains, and the steady beat of a home finally at rest. Healing is not loud. It is not a headline or a dramatic gesture. It is found in the way you dust your shelves without resentment, in the way you wake up and no longer dread opening your door. It is making breakfast in silence and feeling whole in it. It is not having to explain why you fought so hard because you know. Because your peace is no longer a concept, it is your reality. And maybe the world will forget what happened here. But the walls remember. The floorboards remember. And I remember, not with bitterness, but with clarity, with strength, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who refused to be erased. It had been 3 months since the eviction. 3 months of quiet mornings, of coffee in my favorite mug without someone asking if I had another, of knowing that every corner of the house held my energy and no one else's shadow. But healing doesn't mean forgetting, and I had not forgotten. Not the look on Carl's face when the sheriff knocked. Not the way Dana pretended she couldn't understand what was happening. They may have left my home, but pieces of their presence still lingered. There was still the dent in the pantry door, still the cracked tile in the bathroom where Carl had dropped his speaker, still the tiny marks, physical and invisible, that I was learning to live with. One breath at a time. I had started therapy, not because I felt broken, but because I needed someone to help me make sense of the fury that still sparked inside me. The therapist, a woman named Jo, listened without interrupting. And one day, she asked, "Have you ever given yourself permission to be angry?" I blinked, because no one had ever asked me that before. Anger, for women like me, was always something to suppress, to tuck away beneath politeness and grace. But now I was learning that anger could be sacred, that it could point to where the wound lived, that it wasn't the enemy, it was the signal. So I let myself feel it. I wrote about it. I painted it in dark reds and smudged grays. I went to the gym and let it fuel every lift, and slowly, that anger began to shift, not into forgiveness, but into understanding. They hadn't taken anything from me I couldn't rebuild, but they had shown me who I was when tested, and I was proud of that woman. She was quieter now. Yes, but she was steel beneath soft fabric. One afternoon, I received a call from Gary, my lawyer. He had good news. Carl and Dana had tried to file an appeal. It was denied. The judge ruled their case as frivolous, and they were ordered to pay additional court fees. Gary laughed a little when he told me. They thought they could bluff their way back. But they underestimated the paper trail we built. Every receipt, every message, every photo, it mattered. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: closure. Not the cinematic kind where everything gets wrapped with a bow, but the real kind. The kind where your chest no longer tightens at the thought of them, where you walk into a room they once violated and you don't flinch. That weekend, I visited my parents, told them everything I had been through. I had kept them in the dark, thinking I could handle it alone, and I had. But sharing it made it feel more real and also less heavy. My father listened without interruption, and when I finished, he looked at me with eyes that held something close to awe. "You did all of this," he said. "You held the line when no one else could." I smiled, because that was exactly it. I didn't need to scream or prove my worth. I just needed to hold the line. I started journaling again, not just the pain, but the wins, the quiet victories, like making banana bread without worrying if someone had used the oven before me, or walking barefoot to the mailbox, or dancing in the kitchen without headphones because no one could judge the music. The house began to feel new again, not because I changed everything, but because I reclaimed it. Room by room, breath by breath. Even the guest room, the one they had taken over, began to feel like mine again. I painted the walls a soft blue, put a small writing desk by the window, and one afternoon, I sat down and started writing this story. Not for vengeance, not for pity, but for anyone who has ever been pushed out of their own space, for anyone who has ever been told they are overreacting while watching their life be chipped away, piece by piece. This story is for them, because the truth is, not every battle looks like one. Sometimes, it looks like smiling at your neighbor again. Sometimes, it looks like buying yourself new sheets. Sometimes, it looks like drinking tea alone and realizing you are not lonely. You are whole. You are safe. You are home. The more I wrote, the more I remembered details I had buried, the small humiliations, the way Carl once laughed when I asked him to move his shoes from the hallway, the way Dana rolled her eyes every time I walked into my own kitchen. Those memories did not sting anymore. They sharpened me, refined me. I joined an online group for women who had dealt with housing disputes. Their stories poured out some worse than mine. But in the pain, there was power. A community of people who had stood their ground in the face of manipulation, silence, and the law. I shared my story too. Not for validation, but because silence had never served me. One woman messaged me privately. She said she had been afraid to speak up for months, but after reading my words, she contacted her landlord, told him no more. And when I read her message, I cried. Because sometimes, survival becomes something more. It becomes legacy. A quiet torch you pass to someone else who needed to know they were not alone. I started teaching myself new things again. Gardening, a little carpentry. I replaced the cabinet handles they broke, fixed the light fixture they damaged. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to leave my own fingerprints on every part of this house. One Sunday afternoon, as I was planting marigolds along the front walkway, a little girl from next door came over. She said, "I like your flowers. They look strong." And I smiled, because they were bright, resilient, unapologetically bold, just like me. That night, I stood at the front window. The porch light glowed softly across the marigolds, and I thought about how far I had come, not in miles, but in spirit. From the woman who hesitated to say no, to the woman who stood before a judge with every document in place, from the woman who cried into her pillow, to the woman who laughs again loud and without apology. Some people say homes are just walls and wood, but this place, it became the setting of my greatest test and my greatest triumph. Now, I light a candle every evening in the entryway, a simple ritual, a flame that says you're safe, you made it, you didn't let them win. And every time I pass that flame, I remember what it took. Not just strength, but choice. The choice to reclaim, to restore, to rise. So if you ever find yourself pushed to the edge, questioning your worth, your power, your right to be heard, remember this story. Remember my house. Remember how quiet does not mean weak, how silence can be strategy, and how justice, even when slow, can still find its way home. The strangest thing about peace is how unfamiliar it feels when you finally have it back. I used to wake up and listen for footsteps that weren't mine, for doors slamming, for laughter that didn't belong, even after they were gone. My body kept remembering the fear, the intrusion, the humiliation, but slowly, that changed. Because peace, like anything worth having, takes practice. I began to trust the silence again, to lean into it instead of resisting. No more checking behind doors, no more clutching keys like weapons, just breath, just stillness, just me. One morning, I opened the windows wide, let the breeze move through the curtains like it owned the place, because it did. Because the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like mine. Not a space I had to defend, but one I could finally live in. That same week, I received a letter from the county office, an invitation to speak at a homeowner legal workshop. Apparently, word had spread. The clerk who processed my eviction paperwork remembered me. She told her supervisor, and now they wanted me to share my story. At first, I hesitated. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't know if I could put it all into words. Not without my voice shaking. Not without going back to that place inside me that still carried the bruises. But then I remembered the woman who messaged me after I posted in that forum, the one who said I helped her take her life back. And I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been made to feel small in their own space. So I said yes. I stood in front of a room full of strangers, heart racing, palms sweating, and I told them everything. I told them about the quiet disrespect, about the invasion disguised as politeness, about the way people will gaslight you into thinking you're the problem for defending your own home. And I told them how I won, not by yelling, but by knowing the law, by documenting, by refusing to back down. When I finished, the room was silent, not out of discomfort, but because every person there understood, deeply. And when they clapped, it wasn't for drama, it was for survival, for truth, for strength in stillness. After that day, I started volunteering at the local legal aid clinic once a week. I help people fill out forms, explain their rights, listen to their stories. Sometimes they cry, sometimes they're angry, always. They're tired, but they leave with more than they came in with, not just paperwork, but possibility. Justice doesn't always show up in a cape. Sometimes she's wearing a name badge and holding a clipboard, and sometimes she looks just like you. One evening, as I locked up the clinic, I looked at my reflection in the glass, and for the first time in a long time, I liked the woman staring back. She looked tired, yes, but she also looked certain. Not because everything was perfect, but because she knew who she was and what she would never tolerate again. Healing gave me new habits, not just emotional ones, but physical routines too. Every Sunday morning, I watered my plants. Every Wednesday evening, I wrote in my journal. Every Friday night, I lit a candle and played soft music, a promise to myself that I would never let the chaos return. There's something powerful about routine. When everything feels like it once spiraled out of control, building structure becomes an act of revolution. I was reclaiming time, energy, space. A neighbor moved in next door. Her name was Kiara. Single mom, 2 kids, kind eyes. She asked me one afternoon if the neighborhood was safe. I paused, then told her the truth. Safe is what you build inside the walls, and you protect it fiercely. She nodded, like she understood more than I said. Sometimes, women like us speak in code. We see the exhaustion behind politeness. We recognize the resilience in someone's silence, and we become allies without having to explain why. She brought over cupcakes a few days later, said her kids liked my garden. And just like that, a new rhythm formed, a safer one, a quieter one. One night, I took out the eviction notice from my filing cabinet, not out of nostalgia, but because I needed to remember how far I had come. The woman who filed that document, she was scared, alone, but she did it anyway. And the woman standing here now, she was forged from that courage, that fire, that refusal to give up her space. I framed a small copy of that first court ruling, hung it near my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that I don't have to raise my voice to own my power. I just have to stay rooted. And when the storm comes again, because life always brings storms, I will not be shaken. In the spring, I opened my home again. Not to strangers, not to people looking to take, but to those who had always been there quietly. My friends, my cousin Mia, my co-worker Julia. We gathered around my kitchen table, the one I almost gave up, and we laughed. We shared stories, some painful, most healing. We toasted to things that stayed and to things that left and taught us something. Mia pulled me aside as she left. She hugged me tight and said, "You're not just strong, Alyssa. You're wise now." And I felt that, deep in my chest, because pain can either make you bitter or it can make you better. I chose better. Sometimes, I wonder if Carl and Dana ever think about what happened, if they tell the story differently, if they still believe they were victims of circumstance instead of architects of their own destruction. But I don't dwell on it, because closure is not about what they feel. It's about what I no longer carry. No more resentment. No more need for revenge. Just distance and peace. Now, when I walk into my home, I feel the quiet humming through the walls like music. No noise, no drama. Just the steady rhythm of a life I've fought to reclaim. And if someone ever asks me how I did it, how I stood my ground, how I protected my home, how I didn't break under the weight of it all, I will say this: I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I built. I documented. I endured. And then I rose. Because sometimes the loudest victories are the ones no one else sees. They live in the way you breathe deeper, in the way you sleep through the night, in the way your heart no longer races when someone knocks at the door. I am Alyssa Monroe. This is my house, and I will never apologize again for protecting what is mine.